Welcome to another Watercolor Wednesday, everybody. Today we're going to be painting a very winter-esque mountain. I loved how it turned out, and this is probably one of my favorite paintings so far. So the first thing you want to do is take your watercolor piece of paper and tape the borders of it using whatever tape that you have laying around. I just used regular Scotch tape, and that works perfectly for me. And then you want to apply a layer of water using a mop brush, and I've linked the mop brush that I use in the description if you wish to purchase it and use it as well. And you want to make sure that the layer of water that you apply is completely even and therefore there's no pooling of the water in the corners of the paper. So just go over it a few times until you're happy with that. And right away you want to apply a light blue color of watercolor on the entire piece of paper. Just make sure that it is on the lighter side because we do want the focus to be the mountain that we're going to be painting later. And if your background is already super dark, then we're not going to achieve that dramatic contrast that we're going for. So while your paper is still wet, and this is really important, you want to apply a darker blue color to the borders of your piece of paper and then have that watercolor swoop inwards, sort of like I'm doing now. Now, I found that if you start from the center and then go towards the border, you avoid those little blotchy, like when you lift your paintbrush after doing painting a stroke, sometimes the watercolor bunches in that section, so you'll see evidence of that here. See how it's sort of bunching there? You want to avoid that, so you can definitely just start painting from the center towards the edge, and therefore that bunch or that pool of color will kind of disperse in the edge where it doesn't really matter what it looks like there because it's all dark blue anyways. If you find that your water has dried, you want to wait until the entire painting is dry and then apply another layer of water and repeat the process until you are happy with the background. I think I ended up painting 3 or 4 layers because every time it dried it looked much lighter than I wanted it to look, or the clouds weren't as misty. So just keep doing that same thing that I just went over, making sure to leave the center as bright as possible. For some reason this part didn't film, but you just want to take some white acrylic paint that is watered down and flick it onto the background of your sky, and this will sort of create a starry night sky effect and make it even more prettier, or even more pretty. And you can even paint on some snowflakes, just like classic looking snowflakes with a cross and then another cross in between those 2 crosses. And once your background and the stars have completely dried, this is where you want to start painting your mountain. So as you can see here, I started with the shadowy side of the mountain. So I first, what you didn't see me do is basically just trace out my mountain with a pencil first, just so I didn't have to kind of come up with it out of my head as I was painting. I just followed the lines that I drew on with a pencil. And so yeah, you do want to start with the shaded portion first because it just gives you sort of a guideline to go off of. But once you've painted the shadowy part with black mixed with dark blue and heavily watered down, you want to fill in the other side with a very light blue color, which is a tad bit darker than the white background, but you obviously want it to look like there's a mountain there. We're going to be applying a lot of layers here, so the point is you just want to keep it as light as possible. Unless you have really opaque white watercolor paint in a tube, which I do, then you don't really have to worry about the lightness. So this part will only really work if you have white watercolor that is in a tube, because if you use one that's already dried in a half pan, you just won't achieve the same texture and opacity that we are going for here. Because we want the right side of the mountain to appear snowy, you won't achieve that unless you have really opaque white colors. So that's why having fresh white watercolor right out of a tube is really imperative for this part. So once you've covered that with your first layer of white, obviously it's not going to be completely white because we are working with watercolors here. You want to start painting on those rocky portions of your mountain. So it's kind of difficult to explain. I don't really fully know what technique I use. I just paint random thin lines and dots and blotches in places where it looks appropriate, and then in the end it just sort of comes together. So for the shaded side, you can border, make the line that borders or separates the shaded part from the light part. You can make that extra dark to really intensify that contrast between the shaded part of the mountain and the lighter side of the mountain. You can draw lines coming from the bottom going upwards, and these kind of give the illusion that this mountain is very edgy and rocky. And you can just keep doing that until you are happy with how it looks. I thought it was a little bit too dark, the shaded portion here, so later I went in with a little bit of white, fresh white watercolor just to lighten it up a little bit. But here you can see me going in with another layer of that fresh white watercolor on both sides, just because I really want to create the illusion that there is snow on the right side. Because we applied so many layers of white watercolor, you're probably going to want to go over the rocky parts that you created again. So just take some black watercolor, maybe black mixed with a little bit of blue, and then you can just go over those same kind of texturized areas that you created. You can even add some white watercolor spotted over those areas to make it even more snowy looking, and then add your final white watercolor touch-ups towards the peaks of the mountains, because that's typically where there's more snow. Once you're happy with your mountain, you can either leave it as it is, which I wish I did, but I wanted to add some trees because I love painting pine trees and they always look so good with mountains as the background. So I did add some pine trees in the right corner, but I opted not to add any in the left. Once you're all finished, don't forget to peel your tape off and reveal beautiful crisp edges and a beautiful painting. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to check out some of my previous uploads.